The price of wealth. Shadows in the light. Rita folded her hands, watching her fingers tremble as she stared out the large window overlooking the Lego cityscape. From the mansion, the city looked magnificent, glittering lights stretching for miles, the hum of life even late into the night. It had been 5 years since she married Ijele, and though she was surrounded by luxury, there was a quiet emptiness she couldn't shake. The nights were the hardest. Tonight, the silence felt heavier than usual. Her mind returned to the news she had received just hours ago. She had lost another pregnancy. It was the third time, each one more painful than the last. Ijele had sat beside her on their plush white sofa, his arm draped around her as he whispered comforting words, but there was something in his eyes, a glint, perhaps, that didn't feel right. "Don't worry, my love. There's always another time," he had said, his voice steady, almost too steady. Rita had forced herself to nod, but a chill had settled in her bones. Was it normal to speak of their unborn child's loss with such indifference? She tried to brush it off as a defense mechanism, some way for him to mask his own grief. But this wasn't the first time she had noticed his coldness. As she sat alone in their vast living room, her thoughts wandered to the early days of their marriage. Ijele had swept her off her feet with his charm and wealth. She had come from a modest family, and he had been her ticket to a life she had only dreamed of, a life without financial struggles. But soon after they wed, strange things started happening. Late-night meetings, mysterious phone calls, and hushed conversations that would end abruptly whenever she entered the room. She had dismissed them as part of his business dealings. After all, he was a wealthy man with connections in many high places. But recently, there was something darker, more sinister lurking behind those late-night calls. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. Rita turned to see Mom Nkechi, the elderly housekeeper, standing in the doorway, her face etched with concern. "Madam Rita, you've not eaten anything. Let me bring you some tea," Mom Nkechi said softly, her voice filled with genuine warmth. Rita managed a small smile, nodding. "Thank you, Mom Nkechi." The housekeeper's presence was comforting. Mom Nkechi had been with Ijele long before Rita arrived, and she often felt more like family than an employee. In the quiet moments when Ijele was away, Mom Nkechi would tell her stories of the old days, tales from her village about powerful men and the sacrifices they made for their wealth. Sometimes, Rita would catch a look of caution in the old woman's eyes, as if she wanted to say more but was holding back. As Mom Nkechi shuffled back to the kitchen, Rita's eyes drifted to the closed door of Ijele's study. He had always been very particular about that room, keeping it locked whenever he wasn't inside. She had never been allowed in, and though she tried not to question it, curiosity gnawed at her. Tonight, that curiosity felt unbearable. Taking a deep breath, she got up and tiptoed to the door. She pressed her ear against it, straining to hear any sound, but all was silent. Just as she was about to turn away, she noticed something strange, the faint outline of a symbol etched into the wood. It was barely visible, but under the soft light from the chandelier, it appeared, a triangle with an eye in the center. She traced it with her finger, a shiver running down her spine. It felt ancient, almost like something she had seen in one of Mom Nkechi's old storybooks about the occult. "What are you doing?" Rita gasped, spinning around to find Ijele standing behind her, his face a mask of irritation. I was just," she stumbled over her words, her heart racing. He raised an eyebrow, his eyes cold. "You know better than to snoop around here, don't you, Rita?" The warmth that had once been in his gaze when they first married was gone, replaced by something sharp, almost dangerous. Rita felt a stab of fear, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I wasn't snooping. I was just curious," she replied, trying to steady her voice. Ijele's mouth twisted into a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Curiosity can be dangerous, my dear. especially when it concerns things that don't involve you. He brushed past her, unlocking the door to his study with a key he kept around his neck. She caught a glimpse inside, a dimly lit room lined with bookshelves, strange objects on a large oak desk, and the faint smell of incense. Before she could see any more, he stepped inside and shut the door behind him, leaving her standing in the hallway, feeling both angry and afraid. As she walked back to the living room, a thought crossed her mind: maybe Mom Nkechi knew more than she was letting on. The old woman had often hinted at things, warning her to be careful and telling her tales that seemed to hold hidden meanings. When Mom Nkechi returned with the tea, Rita wasted no time. "Mom Nkechi, can I ask you something?" The old woman looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "Of course, my dear." Rita hesitated, glancing toward the study door before lowering her voice. Do you know if Ijele is involved in anything unusual?" Mom Nkechi's hands trembled as she set the tray down, her gaze darting around the room as if afraid they might be overheard. She leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "There are some things, my child, that are best left alone. But if you are asking, then you already suspect, don't you?" Rita's heart pounded. "I need to know, Mom Nkechi. I can't go on like this." The old woman sighed, her face etched with sadness. "I have served your husband for many years, and I have seen things I wish I could forget. He is a powerful man, yes, but power like his doesn't come freely. There is a price, a dark price." A chill ran down Rita's spine. "What kind of price?" Mom Nkechi hesitated, glancing again toward the study. "Sometimes, the wealth that shines the brightest is built on the darkest foundations. I cannot say more. But be careful, my dear. The path you are on, it is dangerous." Chapter 2: Secrets in Shadows. That night, Rita lay awake in their grand, sprawling bedroom. She stared at the ceiling, the soft glow of moonlight casting shadows that danced along the walls. Ijele had come to bed late, muttering that he had business to attend to. He fell asleep quickly, his breath deep and steady. Meanwhile, a storm of thoughts churned in Rita's mind. The words of Mom Nkechi echoed through her head. Asterisk, the wealth that shines the brightest is built on the darkest foundations. What did that mean? And why did the symbol on Ijele's study door seem so familiar, so unsettling? She had heard stories about wealthy men who were involved in occult practices, whispers of ritual sacrifices to maintain their riches. But she had never imagined that Ijele, her own husband, might be one of them. Could it be possible that he would sacrifice someone as precious as their unborn children for his wealth? Determined to find answers, Rita waited until Ijele's breathing deepened, signaling he was sound asleep. Then, as quietly as she could, she slipped out of bed and padded toward the study. This time, she wasn't going to turn back. She had to know the truth, no matter how terrible it was. The door was locked, as always. She stared at it, frustrated, before something caught her eye. Peeking out from under the study door was a small, crumpled piece of paper. She knelt down, pulling it free, and unfolded it. The words on the paper were written in a language she didn't recognize, but there was something else, a list of dates. As she scanned the dates, her heart sank. They aligned with her pregnancies, each one coinciding with the exact month she had miscarried. Her hands began to tremble. She clutched the paper tightly, a sinking feeling of horror settling in her stomach. Was this confirmation of her darkest suspicions? "Rita!" She nearly screamed as Ijele's voice broke the silence. He was standing in the hallway, watching her with an expression that sent a chill down her spine. "What are you doing?" His voice was dangerously calm. She scrambled to her feet, hiding the paper behind her back. I couldn't sleep." He took a step closer, his gaze piercing. "Couldn't sleep?" Or couldn't stay away from my affairs. Rita forced herself to stay calm, but the fear was clear in her voice. Why do you keep so many secrets from me, Ijele? I'm your wife. I have a right to know. He laughed softly, a sound that was devoid of warmth. Do you really want to know, Rita? Because the truth isn't something you can handle. His words stung, but she stood her ground. Try me. There was a long silence, his gaze locked on hers. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand, pulling her toward the study door. Very well, if you're so desperate to understand. Let me show you. Unlocking the door, he pushed it open, revealing the dimly lit study. The scent of incense was stronger inside, mingling with an aroma that was almost metallic. Rita's eyes drifted over the strange symbols painted on the walls, the bookshelves filled with ancient texts, and the wooden desk covered in objects that looked like artifacts from another world, bones, stones, and what looked disturbingly like dried blood smeared on a small bowl. Her heart pounded as she took it all in, dread pulling in her stomach. What is all this?" she whispered. "This," Ijele replied calmly, "is the price I pay to keep what we have." Rita felt the weight of his words settle over her like a shroud. She couldn't bring herself to look at him. "You've been sacrificing our children," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. He didn't deny it. "You think wealth like ours just happens. In Lagos, there are two kinds of men, those who are willing to do what it takes, and those who stay poor. I made a choice. And I suggest you accept it." Rita's hand flew to her mouth as the realization fully sank in. Her husband, the man she loved, had been sacrificing their unborn children, his own flesh and blood, for wealth. A nauseating wave of horror washed over her. "Ijele, how could you?" she gasped, tears welling in her eyes. He shrugged, his expression unchanging. "Sacrifices must be made, Rita. You can either live in comfort, knowing the price, or walk away and live in poverty. But let me warn you," he added, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper, "once you know, there's no living." She stumbled backward, her breath coming in short gasps. The room felt like it was closing in on her, the air thick and suffocating. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt like they were made of lead. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, startling them both. Ijele's expression darkened as he opened the door a crack, just enough to see the person on the other side. It was one of his associates, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek. "We have a problem," the man murmured, glancing uneasily at Rita. Ijele's jaw tightened. "I'll deal with it. Wait outside." The door closed, and he turned back to Rita. His gaze was cold, calculating. "Now you see the truth. You have a choice, Rita. Either accept it and continue to live in luxury, or," he trailed off, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Rita felt a surge of defiance rise within her. She had loved Ijele, but whatever love she once felt was now tainted, crushed beneath the weight of his dark secrets. She could no longer pretend that everything was normal. There was only one thing left for her to do. I need some time to think," she stammered, hoping to buy herself a moment to escape. He nodded slowly, his gaze piercing. "Think carefully, Rita. Because once you leave this room, there's no going back." She left the study, her heart racing as she made her way back to the bedroom. Her mind was a whirlwind of terror and despair, but one thought stood out clearly: she had to leave, to escape this nightmare before it was too late. To continue Chapter 3, please subscribe to this channel by clicking on that subscribe button and don't forget to turn that notification bell to be updated.